Okay, can you give us a brief history of dates and places in your life, such as when and where you were born, where you went to school, when and where you were married, those kinds of things?
Okay.
Sure.
Should we do it chronologically, take turns chronologically, or should we just do it one at a time?
Well, maybe we can put it together. I was born in Heber City, and it was on August the 5th, 1942. And my father was baling hay. It was in the middle of the afternoon. It was like 2:30. And one of the people came down in a truck that had been at the hospital and said, "Your wife's in the hospital and the baby's already coming." He stopped the thing and grabbed his truck and went up there. By the time he got there, I had been born, but I was what's called a blue baby. You know what a blue baby is? Okay?
Without oxygen.
Without oxygen, because I couldn't breathe. I wasn't breathing. And so Dad came in the hospital, and as he did, the doctor said, "Cyril, get the oxygen." We owned the, with my brother, my father's brother, the company that hauled all of the gases, oxygen, acetylene, and nitrogen, and that kind of stuff. So they would deliver to the hospital. So he knew right where it was. He went down and grabbed a tank and was taking it into the place where they were at. And just before he got there, he heard, you know, you start to cry. That meant you were breathing. Okay? And so then they were concerned that there may have been brain damage because there was so long that you had been without oxygen. So maybe there is.
Who knows what he would have been.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And so that was on August 5th, 1942, and the doctor was Dr. Nilsson, and then I grew up. And you were born when?
And I was born on April 3rd, 1945, and at this time my father was off to war in World War II, and my mother was home alone, and so...
Nobody went out to get in a truck to get him, huh?
Nobody went out in a truck to go get him. So I was born on that day, and what else is there to tell you?
So she was all alone, or did she have a sister or mom that came and helped?
Well, I'm sure, but I don't remember details like that. I don't know. I'm sure that she lived in
She
Salt
was
Lake
still living
City.
in Salt Lake where her parents were.
Yes, and actually she moved back into her parents' home at the time when my father left, and so I'm sure that I was, you know, taken to that home first. So.
Now there's some other dates, chronological, that would come along, and you know, I know that we just had her baptism. I was baptized on August the 13th in 1950.
And that was the Heber Third Ward?
No, the baptismal font was in what was called the seminary building, or that's where the stake offices were. And so the buildings themselves didn't have fonts. There was just a font there in a building that had been built probably in about 1912, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was confirmed by my father. And then you know, you went to school. You asked about chronology. Went to school there in Heber City, both to the Central Elementary School and then to the high school, junior high school, and high school that were the same building.
What were their names?
Pardon?
What were the names of the schools?
Wasatch.
Both of them.
Wasatch Junior High and then Wasatch High School. And then went to BYU for a year, and then left on my mission in September of 1960. No, 1961. Yeah, 1961. Came back in 63. That went into a whole lot of other details. Left BYU after another 2 years, so I had a total of 3. So I went to Northwestern University in 1965, having just gotten engaged in August and leaving in September. And we got engaged on the Salt Lake Temple grounds. And then came back here, and so I did my freshman year at Northwestern and my senior year at BYU at the same time. So I was one busy boy.
Man.
I was busy. Plus, we were trying to put my way through school.
But your freshman year, I mean, this is now for your dental school. So
Right.
So it is a graduate program now.
Right.
So.
Right.
But you weren't actually a graduate.
But you were accepted before
That's right.
your senior year.
That's right.
Wow.
On condition
And-
that you completed?
No. No, everybody else that I knew there had already gotten their degree, but
And did you require to have your undergraduate degree?
I don't recall exactly what the rules were. Whatever it was, I had been accepted. I can tell you that when I got to the university, it was when I learned that people apply to so many different schools. I mean, there were guys that applied to 10 schools and 8 schools, and everybody had applied to all these schools. I came off the farm. I didn't know beans about any of that. But I had read up that Northwestern was the top school and the best school if you could get into it. So that was the only place I'd applied. I'll give you just another
Now you
perspective. By the
graduated.
time I finished teaching at Northwestern and had graduated, this is 35 or 36 years later, the tuition, I don't know just what the actual tuition was, but it was probably somewhere in the 40,000s for tuition for a year.
Wow.
When I started, it was $600 a quarter.
Yeah, which probably felt like 40,000.
Oh yeah, I mean the difference was probably we maybe have a bigger percentage out of the actual income, but I had to pay our way through school. This is a whole other story, so I'll leave that away about ways that I tried to get money to go through school. But a lot of it was that I got my brother to sign loans with me, and they never did know how much money they were in hock for.
Your brother?
Yeah. We got it all paid back eventually. And but then we got married in 1966 on June the 30th in the Salt Lake Temple. And fast forwarding, we've got 7 wonderful children, and they've got 7 wonderful spouses, and there's 27 grandchildren with 2 more on the way.
As of
Today, which is the
26.
the 26th of November 2012,
which
November
is
26th.
which is what?
Thanksgiving.
which
Well-
is whose birthday?
Well,
isn't it?
November
the 26th today happens to be my father's birthday, who died in his 90. He was 94. He was in his 95th year, and it was also my younger brother Bob's birthday, who was born on that day, which happened to be Thanksgiving Day, and then on the I think it's the 7th or the 10th of December, I forget now just which. Then our mother passed away from complications after that childbirth. So.
And what year did Cyril die?
In 2000,
Was it 3?
No, it wasn't that late.
94.
well,
so
take
2000
94 on
Ray was born in
to the 7th, so 2001.
2011.
Or
Or no,
Oh,
2001. Yeah.
it'd have been in the spring. In fact, it was April. We were out at April conference, general conference, because of my assignments. And June called and said that she needed help. So Leslie, instead of going to the conference sessions, went up to Heber. And then I went up afterwards, and we stayed with him there in the hospital. We went and got a plane, and he died the next morning.
No, it was 2000.
That would be 2002.
2002.
Yeah, that would have been his 95th
That's right.
year. Right. Okay.
And then what schools did you go to, Grandma?
I went to, oh my goodness. I have to go back and look at my book. I lived in Holiday. The first one was Holiday Elementary School, then I went to Hillview Elementary School when boundaries changed. And then I went to Olympus Junior High School, which happened to be right across the street from our church, which was very convenient. And then I went to Granite High School, which was the same school that my father graduated from when he was in high school.
Now, there was preparation in her going to high school, because what was the name of your mascot? You were the
Farmer.
the
The
granite
farmer. That's right. The preparation for marrying one. And then after that I went to Brigham Young University.
Very good. And when did you get married? Just kidding. All right.
Coincidentally, the same day he did.
Amazing. But in different temples, right? Just kidding.
What was it like? What was it like when you were a little kid? How is it different than today?
Well, I'll start with that, Sierra. I'll take it when you say a little kid about 8, about your age. Some things weren't really very different. We didn't live in a big city. We lived in a small city. and it was, you know, mostly farms. But I would say one of the things that's different than today is that most of the things that you did for fun or that you did for play, you just did as neighborhood kids. There wasn't organized things like your soccer camps and your basketball camps and music camps and go to the swimming pool over here like you do and that kind of thing. It was that you just kind of did those things. And the other thing I think that was different is that for most of them, because they were on the farms, most of the kids were working. They'd have jobs to do, I mean big jobs to do. You know, even though you might only be 8, you'd have certain responsibilities that a lot of the kids we see don't seem to have, and we're glad your folks have jobs for you guys to do.
Okay, I didn't grow up on a farm, and I really do not remember that life was that much different when I was a kid from when you are. Because we had cars, we had houses, we had stoves, we had telephones. Well, I will tell you one thing about the telephone. Instead of having a phone to yourself, we had party lines. And so sometimes you'd pick up the phone to make a phone call and somebody else would be on it. And it would be a neighbor talking to somebody else. And sometimes, and so the polite thing to do, of course, is to hang up. But sometimes we didn't. We listened in. But that was really interesting. Can you imagine sharing a line, a telephone line with somebody else? And so
You'd share the telephone like you might share, you know, in some places you share bathrooms and they share showers and stuff like that. But
maybe
was
so.
the
That was not my experience. We never
Like
shared
8 homes
bathrooms.
would share the same telephone?
I can't even remember
But
that
something
part.
like that?
Most
Or-
party,
Yeah.
most party lines were 4 and 6. You'd be on a 6-party line or a 4-party line. We never were. Ours was a private line, but they cost more than a party line.
But on a farm, we
And
were
so there
farther
was-
away. I guess it was more.
And when you'd make a phone call, even if it was a party line or the other, you'd get on it and you were answered by a person who would say operator, and then you'd tell the operator what number you wanted to call, and then they would plug it into the thing to connect you with that particular line, and you'd be able to talk to whoever you needed to talk to.
So you wouldn't get a dial tone.
And
You did
another
the operator.
thing we had, television was black and white. It wasn't in color.
How
So
big was your
everything
TV?
black and white.
Like, like show with your hands about how
I
big.
would say our screen. We had a screen about
Oh,
that.
that's
I
a-
don't
That
remember.
was a big one.
But that sat in a
Yeah.
cabinet.
Oh, that's right. They
It
were
was
all
like
kind
a-
of with closed doors, and then you'd open
Yeah,
them up.
it'd be big as that table.
Yeah.
Square.
So, Grandma, what was your phone number? Do you remember your phone number growing up?
I wanted to say 847-0728.
847's all right.
No, that wasn't. 0728. We've never had that.
Yeah.
0728. I can't remember.
So just 4 numbers?
No, I'm sure it was more than that, but that's what I remember. Was 0728.
Were
But it wasn't
there
like-
7 digits?
I don't remember
No
that.
area.
It wasn't like National
It's all
2.
local.
You didn't have a street
Our,
name.
our
But
phone
you-
number was 89.
Yours was 89?
And our neighbors down the way was 302J because they were on a party line. And so you'd have somebody would be 302J, 302K, 302M, whatever, and those would all be connected. And the letter it designated a particular person.
Okay, now I remember. Ours was Crestwood 70728. But I don't remember what the Crestwood meant.
Crestwood.
I don't remember that.
Then it would be CR, the first 2 letters. It'd be like
Okay.
your states, the name of your states, Minnesota, it's MN. So it'd be Crestwood, or it'd be Davis, or it would be
But I never
whatever
lived
it
in
would be, and
Crestwood,
you would
but
use the first 2
Crestwood.
letters on your telephone. Or you tell a person you want to call DA or CR, da-da-da. Or you could say Crestwood, they know what that meant.
Cool.
How about
Good
that?
question, Sierra, that was a good question.
Can you recount the story of when you fell off the back of that truck?
Yeah, and in fact, as I was Sierra's age, and I'm
And that's
surprised you
8 years
remember
old,
that.
right?
That's great. Well, what happened is that I was in the 3rd grade, and 8 years old, and I was coming home. We'd come home from lunch. We'd go to school, and then school would be out at 12 o'clock, and you'd go home and eat your lunch, and then you'd go back and start school again at, I think, 1 o'clock. It wasn't a long time in between. And so you had to walk all the way home and grab your lunch and then walk back. And just as I was coming home, I saw my 2 older brothers driving out of the driveway in the truck. And the truck was loaded with bags of seed, so bags of grain, and it was stacked very high because they were getting ready to start planting the fields. And they stopped to let some cars go by, and I didn't know where they were going, but I figured I want to go with them, so I just started climbing right up the back and climbed up on top of the load of grain, the bags of grain. And they went down to the main street, turned on the main street, turned by the high school, and as they turned, he was going fast enough or whatever that the bags of seed shifted, and I'm up on top, and over I go, right onto my head on the highway. And you know where the cars turn, if you've got a cars turning this way and cars turning that way, you kind of get in the middle, a little pile of gravel and so forth. Well, that's what was there. It was a pile of gravel, and I lit into that. Of course, it's just in the spring, so there's probably a lot of stuff that's been pushed there by the snow plows. And I lit into that right on the front of my head right here. And the man on the other corner, right across from the high school, happened to be our bishop. And he was out raking his lawn. And he saw what happened, and he come running over. My two brothers in the truck, I fell off the passenger side. And the brother on that side says, "Stop." Some of the grain fell off, because they didn't know I was there. And so they stopped, and he got out, and he yelled for the other one, and they came around, and I'm just a bloody mess, I guess, on the road, they tell me. And of course, I'm knocked out. And the bishop came over, and my oldest brother picked me up in his arms. They got in the truck, and the blood's running everywhere, and the bishop drove the truck and drove it to the hospital. And the first thing that I remember of everything is that I was already home. Okay, so my brother picked me up, and they got into the truck, and I guess there was just lots of bleeding because the head was all kind of smushed in, and the bishop drove the truck to the hospital. The next thing that I remember, and there may have been some, but today I recall very much waking up at home in my father's bed, and I had a cast over my whole head except for this ear. This one was under plaster, and it was plastered. They'd never do that today, but that's all they had. So it's all plastered down about this far, and like that, because they had put a lot of these bones back into their place. And so that's how they were holding things where it was. And it was so heavy that I could not lift my own head. If I were laying down, I couldn't lift it. I could turn like that, but it was too heavy to lift up. Well, as time went along, some of the rocks that they hadn't been able to clean out would come to the surface. And so I'd have to go back to the hospital, and they would open up the little area where there was no bone. This bone was all gone. They'd thrown those pieces away. And there would be little rocks. And I could still hear them scraping the rocks with their forceps. As they'd reach in, they'd kind of go scrape, and then they'd get a hold of it, throw it out, and you could hear it hit the kidney pan. Bleep! Bleep! And so they took out, I don't know, 20 or so rocks. At first there would be a bunch, half a dozen or so. And then it would be a longer time, and then there'd maybe be that many more, and then it got down to where there would be 3 or 4, and then down to 1 or 2, and so forth. So if you ever hear anybody say your grandpa's got rocks in his head, I don't either. They took them out. Okay? And this area right here, you could press and no bone for a long time. That took a long time to fill in.
It grew in.
But it goes from here, where you see all those bumps and things, you can feel them, and it goes clear back here right behind my ear. So it broke the frontal bone and the parietal bone and a little bit of the temporal bone.
And it knocked some sense into him.
Yeah, you can imagine.
So how
And,
long?
That's why he's so smart.
So I didn't go to school the rest of that year. So this was in the spring. This is probably March. But the students would either bring homework. Some other kids would bring homework home, and then they had a lady that would come around to these kids that were homebound for whatever reason, and they would go over the lesson plan and what was going on in school and so forth. After about 2 weeks or so, they took off a big part of that cast and put another one on, but it wasn't quite so heavy, and it primarily covered about like that much instead of that much. Did that, anything else about that
So
experience?
how long did it take before your cast was all gone? And
There was, down to just bandages, I would say was probably about 6-8 weeks.
and then when were you normal and running around again?
I don't know yet. But I had to be careful about any kind of bump or something like that. But I was back to doing the chores and things like that probably by June.
Wow.
It was probably a good 3 or 4 months.
And were you
But
able
when I would wake up in the morning, or the way I would get waken up, all this time I slept with my father. Because, you know, there was no mom in our home. My mother had died. But I slept in his bed. So I'd be asleep, and usually the way he would wake me up would be one of two ways. I'd hear him saying, "You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up in the morning. Someday," and I would learn this line. "Someday I'm gonna murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find you dead. And next we'll get the other pup, the one that woke the bugler up. Spend the rest of my life in bed." And he'd say, "But you better get up, you better get up," you know. And the other one that he'd do is and you know, you didn't know Dad this way, perhaps, but it would be, "Have you done any good in the world today? Have you helped anyone in need? Have you cheered up the sad and made someone feel glad? If not, if you have, you've been better indeed," or whatever it is.
You have failed indeed.
You failed indeed. And he says, "So you can't help anybody if you don't get up. Get up." But that was after you could actually get up. There was a long time that I just had to stay in bed.
Yeah.
when you had the cast? When you had the cast, you had to stay
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Now the third.
Huh?
No, you
You
said there were
bumped
3
you on
ways.
your head.
I thought
Oh.
you said there are 2 ways. Oh.
I thought it was 2 ways, but there was the other way too, and he wouldn't do all that stuff. Depending on probably how patient he was that morning. "Get out of bed. It's time to go."
Don't be on the skull cap then.
Yeah, he just
But-
take out his drumsticks and
I was
But,
thinking more about
you
get
know,
out of bed.
There was a period of time I remember that I wasn't allowed to go up or down stairs or things like that because they were afraid you might slip and bump it. You know, you've had it's what they call a fractured skull and a brain concussion. And so you're here now about football players, and Tebow and others who get brain concussions and what happens to them.
Grandpa's saying he's in the same, category as all the football
Yeah,
players.
it's all the same thing.
Yeah, it's all.
Grandpa football
Except I did
players.
mine all at once.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, good question. Thanks, Rana.
What's your question?
Lily wanted to ask what you were afraid of when you were little.
Okay, and I'm going first this time.
Sure.
Spiders. I was afraid of spiders. Daddy long legs, any kind of spider, I was afraid of it. I would scream if I saw a spider. It would scare me. And I remember that we had spiders in our house. And you know what? There was a spider that everybody was afraid of, and that was called Black Widow because it was this poisonous
I'm
one.
still not scared of spiders.
You're
Good
not.
for you.
Yeah, you're not.
But because we had a poisonous spider in our area, I was really afraid of spiders, and sometimes we saw that spider in our house. So I was afraid of all spiders.
There were 2 things that come to my mind. I did not, and I still don't like snakes. And it wasn't that I was afraid of them, because sometimes you'd be out in the field and you'd see snakes. But I didn't like them. You'd pick up a board and there'd go off a snake. Makes chills go down my back. So I didn't like snakes. And you had to do certain things even when you didn't want to, but it was scary. And that was when I was little, and I think even when I was a teenager, when I was probably your age, to have to sometimes go down into the furnace room and take out the clinkers out of the furnace and put in the coal and make sure everything was done. I got that done lots of times really, really fast because I didn't like being down there. It was just one of those places where if there was going to be somebody sneak up on you, that would be a place where they could. So my chores were done and out of there and up the stairs.
And with your brothers, they would sneak up on you.
That's right. It could be anybody. Brother, boogeyman, they're kind of the same.
But most of the time, the things you're afraid of, you're too young to understand that you
Yeah.
don't need to fear
Spiders
those
aren't
things.
going to hurt you, and the snakes weren't going to
Yeah,
hurt me.
but
I just didn't like them.
it's just things I was afraid of when I was young.
Are you still afraid of spiders?
No, not like them. Not at all like them. I don't, they're still creepy things, but it doesn't scare me at all like that.
Well,
I'd save my child in a heartbeat and not be afraid to do it.
From a spider?
Halloween, I was Cinderella princess, fairy princess.
Oh, witch. Whoa, I thought you were just going to say princess, not witch.
Okay. Next question.
What was your best toy?
My best toy? You mean something I like to play with more than anything else? Okay, I have to tell you. Have you ever seen a covered wagon?
No.
Have you seen a picture of a covered wagon?
Like the
No.
pioneers.
Like the
Like the
pioneers.
pioneers have.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen
And they
those.
would have oxen that would pull it. And on that covered wagon was a huge wagon wheel. In fact, it had 4 of them. And we had one of those wagon wheels in our backyard. And it stood on its axle. And it was cemented in the ground. And my favorite, that was our favorite toy of all. Because we would sit on the wheel, and my dad would spin us around, and the whole neighborhood would come and sit on that thing, and my dad would just spin us around, and we loved it.
It's a homemade
And
merry
I
go-round.
tell you, I would love to have one of those. If any of you want to know, a Christmas present for Grandma. And we have gone back to our old neighborhood and have seen that wheel
It's still
in
there.
that spot.
Wow.
So I know
So
it.
how what's the diameter of this?
Just like a
approximately?
wagon wheel. You know, like a covered
Yeah.
wagon wheel. Those big
Probably-
wheels.
Probably.
We're not real
six-
With all the spokes in it.
Uh-huh.
And it was the real one.
And how far off the ground were you?
Well, it's like the axle. Well, you know, we were kids. I would say it was... Because my father, as an adult, would stand, and he didn't have to stoop
Yeah,
down.
Yeah, he did, honey. The thing was about this far off the ground.
No.
You climbed on top of it. You were sitting on top of it.
We were sitting on top of
On
it,
the
and I
spokes.
would say it was about like this. And my father would just spin that thing around. He wouldn't stoop down
Like
and
his
go like
waist
this.
high, kind of.
Yeah. So he'd spin it around.
You climbed up on it.
Uh-huh.
How many
Climbed up
kids
on
could
it.
you get on it?
Oh, probably 5, 6,
Wow.
5 or 6 kids on it.
And no head
And you could
split
sit
open.
so that you no, because you wouldn't go flying off of it. But
And all these
it was
spokes to
so
hold on
fun.
to.
I have thought so many times that would be such a perfect outdoor toy because it doesn't swing and hit anybody. You can hold on to it, and it just takes up a certain amount of space,
Uh-huh.
and it just was the
So much
delightful
Wow.
toy. What did you get? My belly button?
What?
Stood up, and the camera didn't.
Are you
Well, let's take a
one?
picture
Yeah,
of face
so
look
go-
like a good one.
So, what about Grandpa?
Shall I tell you one of mine?
Oh.
Please, Grandpa, please, yes,
Grandma,
yes.
tell one of yours.
Well,
No.
A lot of hours that I remember of being young were created, things that you just create and do. I mean, we'd have derricks that would lift the grass and put into sacks, just like you would out on the
Sandbox.
farm, but it was all done on the grass on the yard when it would get cut. And we built all kinds of harbors in the ditches that would go through. You had lots of big ditches, and so you'd have harbors, and we'd use welding rod as the rod and take a piece of metal that would slide down it and channel the water this way or channel it that way and run your boats and stuff. But as I got a little older, the one of the toys that she asked about that I remember just really enjoying was called an erector set. And it was all, it's not like the ones today. You had all kinds of pieces of metal and little screws and little nuts and little lock nuts and a little motor that could run the equipment. You'd power it in and have pulleys and everything, and it would run an elevator, it would run whatever it would be. And so you'd create these things. They'd have a book, but it's like your Legos.
Yeah.
You start building what you want to build. That was always a fun kind of a thing to do, but mostly was something that got used on Sunday afternoons because you didn't work, you didn't do anything other than the chores you had to, but you didn't go out and play either. But we also had a big swing that was there while we were growing that was built on 2 telephone poles.
Wow.
And so the top of that swing was probably up there 15, 18 feet.
That's what we need.
And boy, would it swing.
I bet. Cool.
Who's going to be first?
What are some of the experiences you remember learning how to drive?
When I learned to drive, we had a stick shift.
How old were you?
16, isn't that when you learned to drive?
Probably.
probably 16, right. We had a stick shift, and so it took me a little bit of time. How many of you have driven the stick shift?
I have.
You
I
have.
mean, manual
You have
transmission.
too?
Yeah, I know.
I learned on
No, I
Okay,
haven't.
you
been
never
able to,
have.
But I do it with our automatic cars.
Okay.
What?
Okay, so I
We
just,
may need to have a talk.
Anyway.
That's first, second, third.
You know that noise you've been hearing?
Yeah, that's where it's coming from.
so my mom and dad would take me out driving just like you do. You just have to practice and do that. And I just remember, I don't remember anything negative about it except that you're scared to death. I mean, you're scared because you want so badly to pass, but I passed on the first time. So it was a,
But you practice driving on the streets? Your mom took you out driving?
yes, oh yes. But
Without
way
your
early
license?
in the morning. I didn't wear glasses, at that time I
Without a
didn't wear
license?
glasses. Oh, right, you could do that. Sure, to practice,
But you'd
of
have to have a
course.
permit.
But you'd have to have,
You got your learner's
I don't
permit.
remember a learner's permit. I do not remember that being a part of our, do you? Of our
Well, it
era?
wasn't for me, it may have been for you down in the city. in the
Yes,
city.
I don't remember that part. I just know that you could go get your license at a certain age. But
You did have to have a permit. I remember you did. Gene Payne was the driver's instructor, and he had to give you the permit. He also was the sheriff.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, yeah, good combination.
That's right.
Okay, but you know what, actually, as I'm thinking about it, I did start at Granite High School. I did start at Granite High School. They did have a
The
driver's
driver's
ed
ed.
training through the high school. That's right. That's right, but I practiced with my
We
mother,
started,
father.
you'd be driving farm equipment or tractors or so forth by the time you were her age,
8
Which
years
is
old?
8 years old.
just routinely.
Yeah.
And, but you probably wouldn't drive the bigger trucks or car or something like that until you were probably his age.
Which is 13.
And so by the time you got to be 15 or 16, you had been driving equipment all the time, and most of that was just that you saw what everybody else did, and so you learned to do it. What you had to learn with the trucks was to be able to shift, because some of them were bigger trucks and so forth, and none of it was automatic transmissions. Nothing had an automatic transmission.
Were you big enough to reach the pedals?
Sometimes we would have blocks that got put on the pedals to make them so that you could reach them. And so you'd have that on the tractors too. So you'd have the blocks on or the blocks off today.
Depending.
Yeah, depending on who was doing
How
it.
old the kid was.
That's right. That's right. And but we did have the driver's training type of a thing. I remember in high school, and with some of it was the situation, now, here's what you're going to do and all that. I don't recall there being any of these classroom instruction where you had videos and movies,
Well,
but it was mostly the
Solid
lecture,
in
and then
the
it
car.
would be to go get in the car. And I remember my first one. There were two other kids there who were both girls and probably hadn't had as much, the farm type of a thing. And so he has one drive around the street, now turn right, now turn left, and so forth. We did that. Then he has the other one do a little bit of that. Then he says, okay, your turn. Let's go up to Hailstone. So you go out onto the Highway 40, and we went up to Hailstone, which is where the church farm used to be, and made a turn up this highway and down that one and back down to the school again, and that was it, And the whole thing probably was all done within the week,
And then you went to the DMV and took your test?
Then you had to go down. There was a place there in Heber where you could pass off your driving test when it was time. But I did have a problem in being able to do that. All this driving, all this stuff you'd done, the week before I'm to be able to go get my license, I'm coming out of the lane. The lane just means that there's these roads that go down into your fields. And where it meets the highway like this, and there was a stop sign for the roads that comes this way. The lane didn't have a stop sign, but you came here and you joined the oil road. And so I'm coming like this in a truck, and the guy's coming down this way, and he's late to get to his job up at the mines. And so he's hurrying, and he goes right through that stop sign. And the truck's like this, and he comes this way, and we hit right here on that passenger side fender on my side and his driver's side fender. Okay? And so they came, and so he got a ticket because he ran the stop sign. But I got one because I did not have a driver's license. You see? And of course, the cop knew that we drove all the time.
Yeah.
We drove on the highways and everything, but anyway, now you gotta do something. And so because you had a ticket, or because you had a violation, you couldn't get your driver's license for another, I think it was 2 months, you know. So
And
you just had to wait.
Did you have to be 16? Was that the age? Do you remember?
Yes, it was 16. And I took that truck into the what we would call the mechanic shop. You know, you had wood shop and so forth. Farm mechanics, it was called, and completely got rid of every bump. I did all the body rebuilding.
Oh, you did it yourself?
Straight,
Oh, wow.
as a project, and so I got credit for it
Oh, in high school?
in high school.
Oh.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Welded what had to be done and patched things up and used a lot of Bondo and put in a new headlight, and that
Bondo.
truck ran on and on and on.
Neat.
1946 Chevrolet.
So it's nice to be able to create your own extra credit project here.
Well, some ways,
not
I guess. So
Make
that
the
was,
best- make the
that's
best
kind of
of
what
it.
that was like. Then did you say something about a job?
Not yet.
Oh. oh,
But what
okay.
was it like when you were trying to learn at age 8? Did you just take
Um,
the tractor out? And
Do you remember?
Yeah, I can remember a couple of things, and also depending on what you were pulling or what you were doing. One of the first jobs that you would get would be harrowing, or driving the tractor when you were picking rock. You know, and others putting on. So you're just a little kid, so somebody would be able to steer the darn thing so it didn't go in the stream.
What is harrowing?
And
creating the rows and
you're-
the...
no,
H-A-R-R-O.
no, that comes later.
Mm-hmm.
With harrowing, after the fields have been plowed and the sod's being worked down, you can disc it down, and then you use a harrow, and it's such that you've got like teeth like this into the ground. They're about every foot apart, and then there'll be one in between, then over here, and so on. And so these would spread out for quite a distance. So as you go along, that's taking the dirt and breaking it down into a very fine dirt, ready to be
Getting rid of
planted.
the clods. And
That breaks it all down and stirs it, takes anything off that's on it.
So it wouldn't matter if you were driving crooked or anything.
That's
you could
right.
just-
That's why
That's right.
he was speaking about
Rows,
marking, and
yeah.
marking, you've got to be very straight.
Mhm.
So that was one of the more
More
skilled
advanced.
jobs, advanced jobs. But often you would start with harrowing.
Is harrowing where there's those big round discs on the...
No, that's a disc.
That's
The
not
harrowing
harrowing.
has just teeth. That comes after all of that. So you got the heavy soil, then you disc it down and you're breaking it down. So it's kind of like if you go out here and you're doing your gardening, you dig it all up and you got clods and clumps and so forth. Then you take your rake, your garden rake, and you work that back and forth to where you finally got a very fine soil. That would be harrowing. Okay.
All right.
What is a Christmas tradition you remember from your childhood?
Okay, I will tell you. My grandfather made a Christmas tree stand that was a little house, and it was painted green. And the whole thing was painted green, and it was just a little wooden house, and it had little steps, and it had a sidewalk, and it sat on a big square that was the yard, and it had posts and a wooden fence all the way down, so you'd have posts at the four corners of it, with a little wooden fence all the way down, and we would take cotton, sheets of cotton, that, you know, the cotton at Christmas time that you have that looks like snow that you put underneath your tree. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so we would put that over the yard, and we would sprinkle little shiny little sprinkles over it so it looked like new fallen snow. And we put it on top of the little railings that bordered it, and on these little caps on each one, just so it looked like new fallen snow. And we put it all over the yard, and then we put it on the chimney, and we put it around or on the roof, and then we put it around the chimney. And in the chimney went the tree. So that supported the tree, and the tree was on top of the house.
This is the
Really?
Christmas tree.
That was our
And
Christmas tree.
as you're describing this with your hands, is that about the size that it was?
I would say it was about this size square, okay? And it had the house in the middle of it.
Wow.
And so, and it had just an opening so you could, like in the, you know, the little steps up onto the porch. And it was just fun. And every
And
year.
the chimney was the tree stand?
And the chimney was a tree stand.
Wow.
And it was, yeah, it was a homemade, you know, that my
Cool.
grandfather had done. And Anyway, it
That
was
sounds
it
neat.
was just a wonderful tradition. We all looked forward to it, and I'd never seen anything like it. And darn, I wanted to inherit that.
Who did?
Who got it?
You know what? Nobody did.
Oh.
And I.
Too much
It
arguing.
seems to me that we had to put it in storage at the time of the move. I'm forgetting,
Uh-huh.
and that it was stolen.
It was lost.
Yeah, it was lost.
Huh? Oh, that's too bad.
So that's my memory of it, but I can't remember for sure the details of that.
Well, Christmases were really, really, really special. The trees would be big. The house had 9-foot ceilings, and so the trees would fill it, and they generally were cut down. They always were cut down there in the mountains. But two of the things that I remember that was just kind of a special thing of Christmas, and I look back at it now and think, boy, that was a lot of work for what we did, but it was a tradition that had begun long before I came along, that we would have Christmas at 6 o'clock
In the morning?
in the morning. So certain people would come, and everybody had to be there at 6 o'clock because we're going to go through into the kitchen. So we'd have a doorway like that didn't have a door, and there would be a big blanket that had been hung over it. So you couldn't see what Santa Claus had brought or whatever, you know. And this tree would be decorated and lit up, and it was so exciting to be able to go into Christmas. But in order to have Christmas at 6 o'clock, that meant the cows had to be already milked and fed and everything. So you'd start out a week before milking the cows about half hour earlier every day.
So they could be ready.
But you had to do that then in the evening. You had to move it up too. And so you'd work this up to where on that morning you'd go out there and start milking cows instead of what was usually 5 o'clock in the morning. You were starting to milk the cows at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
You couldn't just suddenly do it on one day. That would throw them off. But if you kind of moved them a little bit every day, you see, and then after Christmas, you had to go the other way.
Yeah.
You had to kind of taper them back into a normal routine, and it didn't take as long, but just a lot of work. But it was so exciting to do all that at night with the idea that you're going to go into Christmas, and by 6 o'clock, all your chores were done.
Yeah.
You could have the day.
Until now 1 in the afternoon.
Yeah, until you had to go back the other direction. But another thing, and this was a thing I didn't like, but we all did it, you know, but it was not, it got to where it was just not fun. And you got to remember now, our mother had passed away, and so my sister was the oldest in the family, and she wanted the things to be just right on the tree. Well, boys got tired of hanging icicles. Now, icicles were little tiny strips of silver foil, and they'd be about this long, but they'd only be about not even a quarter of an inch wide, about 3/16 of an inch wide. And you'd start at the branches, and you'd string it over the top and down this way. Then you'd come out a little bit and do another one, and then you'd do another one. And you had to do that on all the branches of the pine tree. Okay? So you'd have lights, a few ornaments, but mostly it was icicles, these silver icicles on the tree. Today you see silver garland or stuff that's run around the tree or so forth. I haven't seen icicles on a tree in years and years and years.
Too many bad memories. Huh?
That's the way you decorate them.
And that's how we
And
decorated them too.
That'd take time, and pretty soon you're kind of putting them on in globs, you know. She'd straighten it all out.
And then, did you save these from year to year, or did you
Yes,
come out each year?
you'd take a magazine, like a Life magazine, a Look magazine. It'd be bigger than an Ensign, so it was one of the bigger magazines. And you'd take them and as you'd lay them down, you'd lay them down on top of each other, so you could then close the page and go over it a little bit further and do some more, so it would hold them, so they were
Flat.
kind of pressed in there. And be careful that they got laid in the bottom of the box so they didn't get wadded up, because if you wadded them up, it was kind of like wadding up a gum wrapper. Just foil, you know, they stick together.
No pretty.
Huh.
Good question.
Interesting.